Good evening and welcome to another session of Maclean's in Conversation, our first for the new year. My name is Paul Wells. I'm a senior writer for Maclean's magazine. And as always, we're grateful to our friends of the Canadian Bankers Association for making these webcasts possible. We were kind of thinking we should really start doing the show up again for the new year. And then some events happened in Washington that made it really clear that we should get on air as quick as we could. And really obvious who we should invite, our U.S. politics panel, which today consists of Scotty Greenwood, the CEO of the Canadian American Business Council. Hi, Scotty.
Hey, Paul. Thanks for having me.
And EJ Dionne Jr., who is the columnist for the Washington Post. How are you?
One of my heroes.
Yes, well, this is it. And basically everyone's favorite guy.
And you mind. Thank you. And Paul is both of our heroes, so we're happy to be here.
That's exactly right.
We also invited Eugene Daniels from Politico magazine, who has recently been posted Politico, the tentacular multi-platform news organization, who's recently been posted to the White House as one of their correspondents. And I was going to ask him what the work schedule is like at the White House, and we have our answer. He pulled pool duty, which means that he's stuck at the White House and he couldn't join us today. So we'll have to get by as best we can without Eugene.
In good news, he's actually getting his questions answered, possibly for the first time in 4 years. So,
well, this is it. It's going to be a very different work environment down there, and we look forward to seeing how that evolves, and we'll keep an eye out for how Eugene does down there too. Boy, where to begin? I guess let's begin just before the action started. 3 Wednesdays ago, there was the small matter of an insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. The day before that, there was the perhaps overlooked matter of 2 pivotal special elections for the Senate in Georgia. And I know, as someone with long experience in Georgia politics, Scotty's going to want to explain to us what that means. Maybe set the table for us, Scotty.
Sure thing. Thanks, Paul. Georgia is one of the states that has a majority vote rule, meaning you could have multiple candidates running for office, but if you don't get 51% or 50% plus one, you go into a runoff election. So, back in November during the general election, we knew that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris won, but we actually didn't know who won in Georgia because they had to go to a runoff, and so that was scheduled. So the last time that happened, when the Democrat won the White House and there was a runoff in Georgia, was 1992. I was involved at that time, and the outcome was the Democrat, Bill Clinton, wins the White House, but Wyche Fowler lost, as EJ will remember, to Paul Coverdale. So this time there was a lot of anticipation about what would happen and there were 2 Senate seats, which is also unusual. And the reason there were 2 Senate seats up that almost never happens is that Johnny Isakson, the incumbent from Georgia, was ill and had to step down. And so you've got this really unique phenomenon, I think, in our history, where the Senate is evenly divided, and if Georgia goes Republican, or even one of those 2 seats goes Republican, Mitch McConnell gets to remain leader, and the Senate is Republican. If the Democrats somehow win both of those seats, then the Senate is 50-50, and then the vice president, now Kamala Harris, is the tiebreaker. So this is huge, earth-shattering news in Washington, and a big deal about the way we organize government and the way policies are going to go. And it was, of course, completely overshadowed, Paul, by I think something that the next thing that happened that you're going to talk about. That was January 5th. Was the Georgia runoff.
Could I underscore that what happened in Georgia? Because I think this whole election would feel quite different if those 2 seats hadn't gone to the Democrats, because the margins may be thin, and they certainly are thin in both the House and the Senate. But the Democrats have unified control of the elected branches. They haven't won an election like this since 2008. And the majority leader in the Senate has enormous power in terms of what gets to the floor of the Senate. So the ability of Joe Biden to pass any of his program, or at least the bulk of his program, is so affected by this. And I think a couple of things striking about Georgia. Number one, Georgia elected an African American, a Black American minister, and a Jew to Congress from Georgia, a state associated for many years with white supremacy, Lester Maddox, Eugene Talmadge, all these names in American history associated with white supremacy. But more than that, they won in part because, unlike that Coverdell White-Fowler race, the assumption was, oh, Republicans win runoffs in Georgia because Republicans turn out. And there was a real turnout differential this time. The people who stayed home more were the Trump voters in northern Georgia. Democrats turned out in great numbers. And, you know, there's a lot of speculation that one of the reasons the Republicans didn't turn out is because Donald Trump, their hero, told them that the electoral process didn't work. And there were all kinds of such obvious divisions in the Republican Party going into that election that it made it harder for Republicans to turn out their own vote. And Trump's behavior, once again, helped turn out Democratic votes. And it should be said that John Ossoff and the Reverend Raphael Warnock ran very good campaigns. But that was part of the story, too.
That's exactly right, EJ. And, you know, Paul, the one other thing I'll say from my days in the vineyards in Georgia, if you will, in politics, is they never want outsiders. Like, you never, like, anything north of Macon is a Yankee, let alone, you know, outside of Georgia, north of Atlanta. And so this was a race where the eyes of the country were focused during the entire runoff because of this hanging in the balance. And so, you know, it was right through the holidays. I mean, you couldn't turn on the TV. That people were getting direct mail from everybody, door knocks, and you know, you would think they'd like being in the limelight. Iowa likes it every 4 years. New Hampshire likes it in the presidential, but Georgia would rather just mind its own affairs, and they just didn't have that luxury this time. That's how important it was.
Can we read anything long-term and cultural into all of this? Is the South changing, or was this more simply a case of the Democrats really bringing out their ground game?
No, the ground game was important, but the South is changing. I mean, the indicator of what could happen in a number of states is the state of Virginia, right over the river from where I am sitting, where Virginia was a very loyal Republican state, the only Southern state that Jimmy Carter didn't carry way back in 1976. That's how Republican it was at a time when Carter swept the South. And Virginia, because of the growth of the suburbs outside of Washington, D.C., in combination with the Black vote in Richmond and the Tidewater down in the southern part of the state, the whole character of Virginia has changed, and it's become really a Democratic state now. That kind of change from in-migration from non-Southerners, if you will, from people who are not culturally Southern, has begun to change in North Carolina. The betting had been that North Carolina, not Georgia, would be the next one to flip. But Georgia, I think one interesting fact about Georgia, there has also been a remigration of Black Americans south. There was the Great Migration north in the 30s and 40s and 50s to the factories, away from segregation. Now with economic growth in Georgia, the Black population is growing again. So you have real cultural change from the migrants, from white migrants from the north, and you have Black inward migration. Then you got mobilization. Everybody is, Joe Biden, when he went down to campaign for Ossoff and Warnock, said if we had 10, I think he said 10 Stacey Abrams, we could rule the world. She was a great organizer, and the name Stacey Abrams in a way stands in for a broad organizing effort that's been taking place in Georgia for the last 4 years. Massive voter registration, change in the registration law that made it easier for people to register. That was also part of it. But it's a cultural change that's taking place state by state in the South.
But I agree, and I think Black women are the story of our day right now. Stacey Abrams, my good friend, Keisha Lance Bottoms. I mean, there are a whole bunch of amazing Black women that are, in charge, which is wonderful. But to say it's changing is right, but that doesn't mean that the extremists, the pro-Trump supporters, are any less extreme. Like, and in fact, it's quite the opposite. So the more progressive, the more Democrats that get elected, we may talk about the impeachment and things like that, the more repercussions there are, Paul, for the activities of Trump. That, it doesn't mean that suddenly, the white supremacist movement sort of realizes the error of its ways. They become more isolated and, in fact, more vociferous in many ways. The more what I would call progress is made on racial issues and progressive causes.
Okay, let's move the Georgia game into Washington. I want to get a sense of what this means for congressional politics over the course of a Biden presidency. So he's got the White House now. He's making already aggressive use of the executive order function. He's got the House of Representatives. He's got a razor majority in the Senate. Is it axiomatic that he's just going to lose that at the midterms in 2 years, the way Bill Clinton did, the way Barack Obama did, or was that just a coincidence and anything's possible in 2022?
Well, typically in the House, after the president's party in the midterm election, after the first time they're elected, loses seats. The House is really tight. Democrats lost seats in the House in a year that Biden won the presidency. So the House, I think, you could say could flip and could become Republican. The Senate is a completely different story, and it's a different story for lots of reasons, but one of which is we have to see what happens with Trump. Does he form the Patriot Party? Do the Republicans completely divide? In which case, Canadians have seen this movie. When the right was not unified in Canada, the Liberals were able to govern. Last time I lived up there, when the right was united in Canada, that's when Stephen Harper was able to come to power. So you could see that story playing out, particularly in these Senate races, depending on what happens with Trump and his supporters, in my view.
Yeah, you're right, Paul. The rule has been generally that the party in the White House loses seats in the midterms. But there have been exceptions to that. There was a famous one way back in 1934, in the middle of the Depression. FDR was very popular. But two more recent cases. One is in 2002, after 9/11, when the Republicans gained some seats. But before that, in 1998, when Republicans made impeaching Bill Clinton their battle cry, and the country didn't want to impeach Bill Clinton, and Democrats actually made some gains. Normally you'd say it'll be a normal election and the Republicans would pick up the House, and I suppose that's probably where the betting markets are. Here are sort of a couple of reasons why I think it might be different and more like one of those other midterms. Number one, as Scotty said, Democrats lost seats in the House. Often the losses in the midterms are seats you gain in the presidential election because your party has a big hit. You carry districts you shouldn't carry normally, and you lose those back. Democrats had that experience this time. There were seats they carried in 2018 because the Trump voters didn't come out, and the Democratic voters came out in droves. And there were 12 Democrats on the ballot who lost for re-election because the Trump voters showed up this time because Donald Trump was on the ballot. The question that we haven't answered yet is how many voters are there who only show up for Trump? They're Trump-publicans, they're not Republicans. And Georgia might be a case of that, where some of those Trump voters turn out for Trump, but not for the party. So I think it's possible, depending on turnout. And on the Democratic side, I just spoke with a Democratic pollster this morning, and they're concerned that Trump is also a motivator for them on the ballot. So if with Trump gone, will the Democratic turnout also pull back? And so I think those are the warring forces there. On the Senate side, the map is very good for the Democrats, just because of the class that was elected in 2016 was a pretty Republican class. And you now have a number of senators Republican senators not running for re-election in Pennsylvania, now in Ohio. Chuck Grassley's going to be 89 on election day next time. Now, we have pretty old people in the Senate. It's a day of old folks in power, but 89 might be a reach. Richard Burr has said he might not run in North Carolina, so that the Republicans are looking at a fairly tough map. Doesn't mean they can't win a seat. They only need one seat net, but the map in this time favors the Democrats.
Okay.
Only a third, just for those who are not deep American election junkies, only a third of our Senate is on the ballot every 3 years. So this class is more Republican and therefore more vulnerable for the Republicans.
Well, and the other thing to your original question, Paul, about what does it mean for Biden's agenda, like one of the deals is the filibuster remains the rule of the day in the United States Senate, and the filibuster is the sort of parliamentary tool where any one United States senator can dominate the debate and literally talk and nothing else moves forward. And they can do that forever. And they use it as leverage to cut a deal on something. And in order to beat a filibuster, you got to have 61 votes. So in a 50-50 Senate, 61 votes, pardon me, 60 votes. So in a 50-50 Senate, with a filibuster in existence, it's not enough to have your own party. And so what Joe Biden needs, what the president will need on literally anything that has to come through the United States Senate, is a handful of Republicans. We'll have to keep all the Democrats and a handful of Republicans, like 10 or 12 Republicans, on every single issue. So that, it's evenly divided, but the Republicans still have a lot to say. And what that means is you got to govern right from the middle. You can't, the extremists on either end in the Senate are not going to win the day.
And that explains a big fight that happened this week that we should just mention, because under the strange rules of the Senate that took office on the normal date, January 3rd, was organized under a rule that recognized the Republican majority, which existed then because it was 50-48. When the Senate flipped 50-50 with Vice President Kamala Harris casting the tie-breaking vote for the Democrats, you needed to pass a new rule. And for several days, even though the Democrats were the majority and Chuck Schumer was the majority leader, the committees were still headed by Republicans because you needed a new rule. Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader, demanded that Democrats promise not to get rid of the filibuster as his price for letting a new rule go through. Finally, he relented only because 2 Democrats said they would continue to uphold the filibuster. But I think you are going to see a challenge to the filibuster rules in the next 2 years. And that Biden, there's another weird Senate rule called reconciliation, where there are a bunch of measures that are connected to money that you can get through with only a majority. I think one of the early tests will be if Biden and the Democrats look at what the Republicans are willing to accept as a big next round stimulus economic rescue package. Biden put $1.9 trillion on the table. If Republicans say, no, we can't go nearly that big, the vast majority of Democrats right now want to go straight to reconciliation, pass it with 51 votes. And so you're going to have I think you're going to have a struggle over the rules for 2 years for precisely the reason Scotty said. And it's not just left-wingers who want that. To get the Biden program through, you probably won't get 10 Republican votes. It's going to be very difficult.
So we have now provided certainly the most exhaustive discussion of the effects of January 5th of any Canadian news organization. I think for that. Let's move on to January 6th.
Exhaustive and not exhausting, Paul.
I was going to quote Robert Caro, but then we'd never get out of here.
Well, no, that would add class. You should do that.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to mislead our viewers. So January 6th, all hell breaks loose, almost literally.
Yeah.
Was that something that was just going to happen? Was that something that could realistically have been avoided if some actor besides the president had behaved differently? By January 6th, it's now distant enough that I should remind people. What I'm talking about is the large crowds of protesters who invaded the Capitol building, some of them carrying live ammunition, some of them carrying nooses and having a good idea who they wanted to use them on. Essentially unprecedented in modern American politics. What are your thoughts about that extraordinary day? Start with EJ, I guess.
It was just a stunning day. It's something none of us ever expected to see in the United States, just full stop. It was astounding. And as it was developing, you thought, okay, somebody got in the building, they'll get them out. You just couldn't believe it. The same, it's not the same kind of event, but when you first heard a plane hit the tower and you say, oh, maybe it was a small plane that lost its way, and not realizing the monumental nature of it. Forgive me if that's not a good metaphor, but it was that kind of thing where you just didn't expect something like this to happen. And it was scary as it developed, and it got actually scarier once we saw the footage after it ended, and how close we came possibly to Vice President Mike Pence and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi getting hurt or even possibly killed. I mean, it was a rampaging mob inside the Capitol. And there was a very affecting picture of somebody carrying a Confederate flag through the Capitol. And everybody pointed out, not once in the Civil War did the Confederate flag get inside the U.S. Capitol. Could it have been avoided? I think when we go back and look, and Congress is going to take a hard look at it, I think there are ways it could have been avoided. It does not appear that the House authorities were ready for this. There was outside help that they should have gotten earlier. There should have been more troops there. It turns out it looked like the Defense Department slow walked further help to the Hill to try to get it under control. So I think it's possible it could have been contained earlier and possibly avoided. But I think the fact that it came as such a shock, I think people in authority just did not expect something like this to happen. And of course, that's why we have an impeachment coming up, because President Trump, in that speech, inspired, and I think you can say incited, that crowd to go marching down to the Capitol. When there is now footage of Trump saying we've got to fight, and people in the crowd saying let's go to the Capitol, and you get a sense of the interaction between what Trump said and what the crowd was thinking. That'll obviously be used as evidence in the trial. I would not bet on a conviction at the moment, given where Republicans are. But it was frightening. And last quick point, it was awful for 2 weeks to travel around Washington. I covered the war in Lebanon in the 80s. I was in Beirut. I was accustomed to a green line, and I was accustomed to seeing soldiers in the streets with automatic weapons. We were not accustomed to seeing that in Washington, D.C. And large parts of the city were shut off. There was an enormous perimeter, and people have analogized it to the green zone in Iraq. And it was just petrifying. It made you very sad and very angry to be an American and see that in your city there had to be 20,000 or so armed troops in the streets to protect the capital of the United States. I hope to God I never see anything like that, and I hope my kids never see anything like that again.
It really was chilling and kind of almost heartbreaking to watch. Scotty, what were your takeaways from that experience?
Chilling and heartbreaking. So it was, at first it was, I couldn't believe my eyes, right? I was on a call doing work, and everybody sort of said, we gotta end this meeting, go turn on the TV, which is, on 9/11, EJ mentioned it, there was a moment where everybody said, go turn on your TV. And so then to watch it unfold live, it was a couple of reactions. One was, I was thinking it could be so much worse. Because a lot of these people, there were people there that meant to do harm. And then there were a lot of people that were there for the Stop the Steal. You know, they actually just wanted to make their voice heard about the Electoral College vote. And they'd been fed a steady diet of lies and everything else. So they thought this was their last opportunity to make their voice heard. And I thought if all of those people had meant to do harm, instead of just, you know, making a point, it was terrifying because they got in, they breached. And so that was scary. I also began experiencing it. You know, we all now have these multi-screen experiences, right? You've got the TV on, you've got your laptop, you've got your phone, you know, whatever. And so you're monitoring different things. And my friends that are Black there was a whole different conversation about, if you want to know what white privilege is, this is it. And it was like the picture of the guy with Speaker Pelosi's podium walking out. And it was, you know, all of this stuff about the response to Black Lives Matter. And then the apparent, you know, assistance that these people got in. Like, how is it possible that the Capitol's really secure, right? So how is it possible that this happened? And there was an immediate, this had to be an inside job, right? And we're now seeing what the facts are bearing out about the collaboration with some people who actually work in Congress. So, I mean, it was awful. It was a you know, a desecration of the temple of our democracy. I mean, it did though. So period. It did have an effect, I think, on the members of Congress from both parties that were there. And I've talked to several of them since then, and you know, how they interact with each other, whether or not they can ever trust each other. You know, anyway, like it's no longer just a parliamentary maneuver. Like this was our democracy. Our Constitution was at stake here. And how do we transition power peacefully or not? And so the contrast between what happened that day and what happened on Inauguration Day, where when we went through it peacefully and it was beautiful, and I don't mean to be partisan in this. I am partisan in my private life. I'm not partisan in my work that I do, but it was like the weight of the world being lifted off our shoulders. Like, oh, thank goodness it wasn't. I mean, there was a huge military presence, but it was a huge relief. But you know what? Joe Biden's message of unity and healing was not listened to by the people who needed to hear it most. There are a lot of people that didn't watch the inauguration. They don't know what he said. They don't care, and they don't believe him. So we still have a big job to do in this country, and I don't know how we start. I really don't.
Can I just add one?
Sure.
I agree with what Scotty said. I want to underscore one thing. I think one of the striking things about Donald Trump is, for someone who at certain moments was such a successful politician, is how many bad decisions he made politically over a period of time. And I think one of his very bad decisions was the decision not to show up for the inauguration, because by not being there, Trump underscored how big a transfer of power this was. That whole day belonged to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. There were no side pictures of Donald Trump grimacing. There were no interviews with Donald Trump. There was nothing about Donald Trump after 4 years of a country being utterly dominated by Donald Trump. And so his decision, which he made, I guess, as some kind of statement not to go, I think really sped his way off the stage. Now, we'll see how long that will last. We'll see how long he'll be sped off the stage, but it really opened an opportunity for Biden to dominate the scene. And again, I don't think this is a partisan comment. I think it's just a description of the reality since Inauguration Day. Biden has really dominated the scene ever since, and we've heard very little from Donald Trump. And we also learned how powerful his Twitter feed was in commanding our attention, and he no longer has the Twitter feed. And if you had asked me how important that Twitter feed was, I would not have realized how important his having Twitter was until it was no longer there.
You know, sorry, Paul, just one thing. If Twitter hadn't shut him down during those terrible events, and Facebook and the other apps, if he had continued to have a platform, if he had decided to further incite people I believe that the 25th Amendment, which is the mechanism by which his own cabinet and vice president, with the consent of Congress, can remove him from office, I believe that would have been a realistic possibility. But because he was muted and not able to further incite the violence, I think that Twitter saved him from himself, believe it or not.
Okay. I have to say I could never have imagined Donald Trump showing up at the inauguration of somebody who beat him in an election. It just doesn't sound like the guy. And to some extent that was part of his strength, is that the one thing that he was able to deliver to his supporters was that he was never co-opted by the swamp, right? You could, like, he unlike Bill Clinton at one time, who came in as an outsider to Washington and then became a consummate Washington player. Unlike Barack Obama, same story. Donald Trump came in as something alien to the place and left as something alien to the place. There was on the evening show that was hosted by Tom Hanks, you had President Clinton, President Bush, President Obama standing together and reminiscing. And for good or for ill, you could never have imagined President Trump in that crew. He was a different cat, and he arrived as one and he left as one.
There's a real truth to that, and there's also an irony to that, because you talk about his not being a swamp creature, and yet when you looked at all of those pardons he gave out, some of them apparently connected to political contributors, political lobbying, they looked a whole lot like that one single pardon that Bill Clinton got, rightly in my view back then, a lot of grief for. So that yes, he was, and no, he wasn't, if you will, a swamp creature, but symbolically, you're right. On the other hand, he finally had sort of conceded to Biden. And so I'm not sure his brand would have suffered if he had showed up and grimaced. But broadly, you're right. He clearly would not have fit on that tableau with Clinton and Bush and Obama. No way. And they knew that, and that's why they were there together.
I'm hopeful that this is like the last panel I have to do for some time where I even talk about Trump. I am so looking forward. It is just so good to have it in the rearview mirror. And it's got to be hard for him personally to not dominate the agenda, not get all of the attention. I mean, I think I saw some analysis that for the first time, Trump didn't dominate coverage, to EJ's point about him not being at the inauguration and it really being, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's day. I don't want to talk about him anymore. I mean, we can talk about it today, but you know what I mean? Like, we have got to move on as a country.
Could I speak the two sentences I thought of, Paul, when I was thinking of chatting with you today? That what's really interesting about now is suddenly the normal is revolutionary and the expected is unexpected.
Yep.
That if you look at Biden, he has a press conference, he lists some policies, he does some executive orders, he puts out reliable government numbers. In other words, he's behaving, again, this kind of underscores your point about the other three presidents, but he's behaving like a normal president would behave. And after the 4 years we've had, that looks all really stunning and exciting in a way. Obviously, it would never look stunning and exciting if we had simply transitioned from a normal kind of Republican to a normal kind of Democrat.
Yeah, and so one of the questions over time will be, can Joe Biden impress with anything but a return to routine, But I do want to get at the notion of this being the last, Scotty, this being the last panel in which you discuss President Trump. There's one large American institution that seems reluctant to put him in the rearview mirror, and that's the Republican Party. A few Republicans on the day, on January 6th, and in the days afterwards, got up and expressed desire to hold the president accountable and to assert that the Republican Party had an existence independent of him, as it reasonably should. It's a 200-year-old institution. And almost to a man and woman, those Republicans who made that stand have been punished in various ways by institutions of the party in the weeks since then. What does that tell us about the party's ability to assert its independent existence?
Well, we shall see. It's way too early, in my view, to tell if the Republicans are going to, vanquish the Trump folks and take control of their party again. He did execute a hostile takeover of the Republican Party. There's no doubt about it. Moderate Republicans were forced to step down or chose to step down because you couldn't deal with the challenges coming from the Trump enthusiasts. And I think it remains to be seen. I mean, what happened in Arizona, where the state party censured the governor and Cindy McCain and Senator Jeff Flake. I mean, censuring Cindy McCain in Arizona, her response was perfect. She said, you know what, I'm in good company because John McCain was censured by them. And by the way, I don't think he's lost an election ever, but not since 1982 or something. So it's possible for Republicans to continue to get elected and to sort of fly in the face of the Trump enthusiasts. But it's too early. I don't know yet what's going to happen, if they will become regional, like the Patriot Party or whatever, whether it'll be a regional thing that just plays on the margins, or I really don't know. EJ might have some more thoughts on this one. To me, it's early.
A dear friend of mine years and years ago was interviewing a prominent politician in New York, and she asked him a question, and he looked at her and said, on the record, yes, off the record, no. And my friend, the reporter, said, what the heck am I supposed to do with that? And the politician said, that's your problem, not mine. And I think you're dealing here with an on the record, yes, off the record, no situation in the Republican Party. I think an awful lot of Republicans, particularly Mitch McConnell, would like Trump in the rearview mirror. They look at the damage he caused the party down in Georgia, for example, and they would love him to be gone, but they want to keep his constituency and they want to keep his voters. And that's why the on the record yes part is there, where they are very reluctant, with a few courageous exceptions like Liz Cheney, to take him on frontally, so that on the impeachment vote that will be coming up, I think if it were a secret ballot, impeachment would carry. But it's not a secret ballot. Secondly, there is a second vote if he were impeached, which only requires a simple majority, which is to bar Donald Trump from ever seeking office again. There are an awful lot of Republicans who can't vote for impeachment, but would love to vote for the second. I think that's where a lot of them are. But as a political matter, his supporters still loom too large inside the Republican Party for them to walk away from him. So I think it's a real problem they have. So it's not just a split in the party, it's an inner split among Republicans themselves. As I say, the on the record yes, off the record no thing.
And I wonder when, at some point, the Trump supporters are going to realize they've been lied to and that they've been used, right? That the Stop the Steal wasn't about them. It wasn't about Trump saying, I love you, you're special people. It was about him trying to cling to power, and he was using them. And I don't know when they're going to realize that, whether it's this year or 10 years from now or whatever, but at some point, they're gonna know that they were being used and they were being lied to. And at that point, man, the reckoning is going to be very serious.
Okay. Let us grant Scotty her wish for the rest of this session and talk about the new president rather than the old one. I could come up with all kinds of clever insider or wannabe insider ways to phrase this, but it's been a week. What have we learned about President Joe Biden?
Go ahead, Scotty. Wallow in the non-Trumpness of that question.
Well, EJ, you said it so well about how the normal is revolutionary. I mean, we have an administration that wishes to share information, that wishes to be honest with the American people about the challenges, how daunting they are, and that is very serious, first and foremost, about this pandemic. And I think that is new, that is different, and that is important. It's meaningful. This pandemic that we've are all going through is really hard in so many ways. The human life toll, the sort of the impact on people's well-being, mental well-being, and all of that, and the economic toll. Like it's a big thing, and we've got an administration that is quite focused on it, and we've got professionals like my good friend Ron Maclean, who is the president's chief of staff, who knows a lot about how to navigate Washington, how to mobilize the country, how to deal with a crisis, et cetera. And Ron is one of many people that are in this administration that are running it in a very professional, serious way. They're all going to burn out in a couple of years. They're all working so hard. And so luckily there's a deep bench of talent, in this country that can help the government keep going in 2 years when the first wave, go back to try to have a real life. But it's quite normal. We also know, and we'll probably talk about this, that President Biden is serious when he says he wants to engage with our allies. So he had the call, as everybody in Canada knows, with Prime Minister Trudeau, immediately followed by Mexico, the UK, France, and continuing. By the time this is aired, I'm sure there will be some more world leaders. And every time, for example, the administration is asked, how are you going to deal with China, with all of the things, that the threats and the challenges and the opportunities with China, their first answer is always, they're going to take an approach with our allies. We're going to have a coordinated approach. So that's what it's going to be like. It's going to be kind of boring. It's going to be harder in some ways for journalists, because there isn't just like this bombshell a day happening. Like, I can't believe he just said that, and now we get to run with it all night. But I think it's welcome and it's needed. I mean, we have serious issues that we have to deal with, and so I think that's what it's going to be like. Serious professionals lowering the temperature, working really hard, and not always getting it right, but seriously trying, and not just trying to suck up to their boss or make sure they are avoiding a nasty tweet or whatever, which is literally what the last 4 years have been.
I've been trying to channel my inner Paul Wells about how I might write this piece. And it occurred to me is something like this, and you can tell me that I'm doing a bad Paul Wells imitation, but sometimes strategic choices are difficult and complicated, and sometimes they're quite easy and straightforward. And I think for Biden, what he needs to do is hard to execute, but easy. The choice is easy to make. He has made 100% clear that he knows that at the end, he is going to be judged by whether he gets the virus under control by the fall and whether the economy comes back strong. If he does those two things right and nothing else, he will generally be quite well regarded by Americans. There's a poll that came out today that his approval rating is up to 63%. Now, that's not a honeymoon. Presidents have been higher than that. But when you consider how divided we've been, and that he got 50-point-something% of the popular vote, that's pretty good. And I think he's there because voters who weren't necessarily for Biden look at him and say, well, he's worried about the two big things that I'm worried about. So good for him. I think two quick points besides that. I don't know how I did on the Paul Wells lead, but you can tell me after.
That's Paul Wells' biggest dream of his life, is to have EJ trying to, like.
No,
That's why we invite you on, EJ.
No, good. I'm happy to pander. It's sincere pandering. Two things. One, philosophically, you're going to hear all kinds of stuff. Biden is caving to the left, or he is really a centrist. I think the reality of the crisis has pushed Biden to the left of where Joe Biden might have been 8 or 10 years ago. And that the center of gravity of the Democratic Party has moved left. Nothing he's proposing is really radical, but it is ambitious. It's big. The rescue package is big. He has a proposal for a child tax credit that's almost like a family assistance policy for everybody, although that's quite popular among certain kinds of pro-family conservatives, I just want to underscore. But it's not radical. So philosophically, he's going to push the edge, and a lot of Republicans just aren't going to want to vote to spend the money. And so that's going to be a complicated fight. The other is that he is going to pursue rather progressive policies with, as Scotty said, a very experienced bunch of people who know their way around Washington and the world. There are some new faces in the administration, but it is very much a bunch of people who are pros. So he is operationally moderate and establishment, and politically rather progressive, but within the framework of a crisis where you got to do a lot to get out of it.
Yeah, he strikes me, always has, as a moderate by nature, a conciliator by temperament, but the moment doesn't really lend itself to that. I mean,
Yes.
Basically the Cole's Notes version of his inaugural speech was that America is in 5 different flavors of crisis simultaneously, and I don't think incrementalism gets you out of any of them. So it's going to be very interesting to see the man try to reconcile with the moment.
One of his close aides told me a few months ago that he had been reading every book on the New Deal he could get his hands on. And his point being, we got a big set of problems to confront, and I really want to know how Roosevelt did it.
I bet Roosevelt would kind of be daunted by what's going on right now. Scotty, you do Canada-US for a living. What does this mean for Justin Trudeau?
Well, a return to decorum is certainly welcome. A president that you can deal with, that Canadians don't instinctively really dislike out of the box, you can deal with, is helpful. So I think there's there's got to be a sigh of relief with world leaders right across the globe. The other thing is if you're the Prime Minister of Canada and you've got a president who wants to return to multilateralism, that's a great opportunity for Canada, because Canada plays well on the world stage in these multilateral institutions. It didn't spend the last many years slagging the World Health Organization, the World Trade Organization, the UN, and as a result, my impression is that Canada can play a niche role that's helpful to the U.S. and be relevant to the U.S. as a sort of multilateral translator. The world talks to Canada, help us understand the U.S. The U.S. talks to Canada, help us understand the world. And so I think there's a great opportunity here for the Prime Minister of Canada to really reset the U.S. and Canada together on the world stage storyline, and that's meaningful.
Okay. The only caveat that I keep pointing out is that probably this president won't have a lot of time for lip service. That the Canada is going to have to show what assets it can deliver, what effect it can deliver on these multilateral files, and it can. But it'll be interesting to see how this government responds under that pressure from a friend.
Well, yeah. Listen. No time for lip service. Everything's too serious. The economy is in crisis. But there again, you want to be Canada because you've already got the free trade agreement negotiated. So you've got the rules of the road, and now you have an administration that's going to play by the rules of the road, and you've got a $700 billion a year economic relationship. So if you're Joe Biden and you're trying to resuscitate the U.S. economy, you can't do that without cooperation and collaboration with your biggest commercial partner. And so there's an opportunity for Canada there too. I didn't mean to not mention the importance of collaboration here. Canada has a lot of experience and a lot of private capital, by the way, on things like infrastructure, and that there will be a big infrastructure conversation in this country. Canada will be relevant to that. So there's lots of opportunities to work bilaterally too.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to tread on Canadian turf, and I'm curious how you would answer the question that I'm going to pose, Paul, because I would think that the good news for Trudeau is that he's got a friend, somebody who looks who in sort of philosophical colors looks quite a bit like Trudeau, is broadly in that same camp, kind of this marriage of progressive and pragmatic kind of thing. On the other hand, I would think for conservatives in Canada, and particularly the moderate direction they're trying to take under this leadership, getting rid of Donald Trump is a real blessing for them too, because they don't have, I think it worked in Trudeau's favor politically to have this terrible example of right-wing politics in the United States, and that terrible example doesn't exist anymore. I don't know, but I would suspect that quietly Canadian Conservatives are breathing a big sigh of relief that he's gone. Is that accurate?
I actually put that proposition to Aaron O'Toole, the Conservative leader, when I spoke to him in this format, and he really didn't like the question. But one of the, I
wouldn't want to answer that if you were he, I guess.
I always want things to work out for the best, but I, as a journalist, I'm also a student of trouble, and I do wish I had got a chance to see a Prime Minister Stephen Harper trying to deal with a President Donald Trump, because it would have been no end of trouble. Most Canadians would still not have liked Donald Trump. A lot of Harper's voters would have wanted him to team up with Trump, and it would have been a never-ending Rubik's Cube, I think, for a Conservative Prime Minister. Similarly, I do think that this is going to be less of a romp in the clover for Trudeau and Biden than it seems at the outset. But it's probably, all things told, a kind of a higher class of problem. That at least they speak the same democratic language. At least they have a similar understanding of the world, and it's based on having read at least a few books about the world. And that's probably a more solid basis.
Well, I have a sense that ideally for Trudeau, the Chrétien-Clinton relationship was pretty damn good as far as I remember.
Yeah.
And it could be, that's the kind of thing I think Trudeau would be hoping for.
Yeah, somebody, I think it might have been some former Canadian ambassador to Washington said, Canadian-American collaboration almost always starts from a suggestion from the Canadian Prime Minister. The Prime Minister comes up with the project because the President's busy. And it'll be interesting to see whether Justin Trudeau agrees, whether he can come up with something novel and appealing, and whether they can really make something germinate from that.
Well, yeah, I mean, in the case of the Clinton administration, which I was served under in Canada at the embassy there, my boss, the ambassador, was involved in some of these Clinton-Chrétien, or all of the Clinton-Chrétien conversations, I guess, during his tenure. And one of the things that Gordon Giffen likes to talk about is, during Kosovo, Bosnia, that crisis over there, Clinton and Chrétien got together, and Chrétien said, like, I'll handle France. Clinton says, I'll handle Germany. They were trying to figure out how they talk to the allies, right? And they divided up the task, and they collaborated together about how to get through that. Kyoto, in the Kyoto climate talks, it was different because Chrétien was trying to out-green whatever the U.S. was doing, and other countries, sort of Europe, got together and beat us. So there are good examples in the Clinton-Chrétien era of how working together really helps advance the interests of U.S. and Canada, and how if you don't work together, sometimes you get outfoxed by some other big trading bloc. So I think it's a good example.
Okay. Whenever we do this, I always tell the guests that we've got up to an hour, but we're probably not going to use the whole hour. We have used very close to our whole hour, and we could probably use another couple, but
and I got to go in a minute, so
let's bring it to a close there. My guests tonight have been Maryscott Greenwood, who is the CEO of the Canadian American Business Council. Thanks, Scotty, for coming out.
Thank you, Paul.
And EJ Dionne, who's a columnist for the Washington Post, a fellow at the Brookings Institution, an institution of American political journalism. It's always a pleasure to see you, EJ.
It's great to see you, Paul. Thanks so much.
Thanks to you at home for watching, and to our sponsors, the Canadian Bankers Association, for making Maclean's In Conversation possible. We'll see you again soon.